The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a soft hiss. Ambassador James Walker led the small group of human representatives into the grand hall, their footsteps echoing against the polished crystal floors. Above them, the curved ceiling showed the real-time view of space, making it feel like they were walking among the stars themselves. The council members sat in rising tiers, creating a half-circle around the presentation area. Hundreds of alien species watched the humans with different levels of interest. Some leaned forward, curious about the newest species to join galactic society. Others barely looked up from their data screens, considering this just another routine meeting. Walker smiled politely as he reached the center platform. His gray suit was simple compared to the elaborate robes and biosuits worn by the council members, but he stood tall and confident. Behind him, 2 human guards carried sealed cases, and a technical expert held a datapad. Honorable members of the Galactic Council, Walker began, his voice clear and steady. Earth thanks you for accepting us into the galactic community. As is customary for new members, we are here to present our military capabilities and defensive measures. High Commander Voss of the Highborn shifted in his seat, his scaled skin reflecting the starlight from above. The Highborn were known as the Council's primary military force, and their energy weapons were feared across known space. Proceed, Voss said, his translator making his words sound flat and metallic. Though I must say, from our initial scans of your planet, we found your technology to be quite basic. Walker's smile didn't waver. He nodded to his guards, who opened the cases. Inside were various human weapons. A standard military rifle, ammunition of different sizes, and diagrams of larger weapon systems. These are examples of our primary military tools, Walker explained. We call them kinetic weapons, or guns. They use controlled explosions to launch solid projectiles at high speeds. A laugh echoed through the chamber. It came from one of the Highborn's junior commanders. Projectile weapons, physical ammunition. He turned to his fellow council members. They're still using powered rocks. More laughter spread through the chamber. Even some of the usually quiet species joined in. Walker waited patiently for the amusement to die down. Councillor Mira, known for her fair-mindedness, raised a hand for silence. Ambassador Walker, surely these are just ceremonial weapons. Your actual military must use energy-based systems like the rest of civilized space. No, Counselor, Walker replied. These are our main weapons. We have, of course, studied energy weapons, but we found our kinetic systems to be more reliable and effective for our needs. High Commander Voss stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over his section. This is absurd. You expect to defend your territory with such primitive tools. Our weakest energy shields can deflect any solid object. Our ship's armor would laugh at such basic attacks. Walker nodded to his technical expert, who stepped forward and activated a holographic display. Perhaps a demonstration would help. We've prepared some test footage. The display showed a military testing ground on Earth, a target protected by a standard galactic shield system, purchased legally through trade channels, stood at one end. A human soldier fired a simple rifle at the shield. The bullet passed through the energy barrier like it wasn't there and struck the target behind it. The chamber went silent. You see, Walker explained calmly, we discovered that most energy shields are designed to stop energy weapons, plasma, lasers, particle beams. They're excellent at dispersing energy attacks, but they struggle with simple physics. A solid object moving at high speed carries kinetic energy that must be stopped. The power needed to halt such objects completely would overload most shield systems. High Commander Voss's scales had darkened, a sign of anger in his species. This is one small weapon. Our ships have multiple layers of defenses. Walker's smile remained unchanged. Of course, this was just a simple example. We have much larger weapons working on the same principle. Rail guns that can accelerate projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. Kinetic bombardment systems that can drop solid rods from orbit with the force of nuclear weapons. All using simple, reliable physics. The chamber had grown very quiet now. The earlier amusement was gone, replaced by thoughtful, and in some cases, worried, expressions. "We look forward to peaceful cooperation with all council species," Walker concluded, "but we believe it's important to be honest about our capabilities. Earth's history has taught us that misunderstandings about military strength can lead to unfortunate incidents." As Walker and his team left the chamber, the silence followed them. Only Counselor Mira noticed that the human ambassador's smile had never wavered, not even once. Captain Tom Reed stood at the bridge of the HMS Defender, watching the holographic display with growing concern. 3 highborne patrol ships were crossing into human space near the Europa 2 mining colony again. This was the 5th time this month. "Send the usual warning," he ordered his communications officer. His crew worked quietly and efficiently, having done this many times before. "Sir," his sensor officer called out, "they're powering up their weapon systems, but keeping their shields down. I think they're trying to provoke us." Reed rubbed his temples. The Highborn had been doing this ever since the council meeting 2 months ago. They would cross the border, weapons hot but shields down, almost daring the humans to shoot first. Their arrogance was going to get someone killed. The main screen lit up with an incoming transmission. The scaled face of a highborn commander filled the display, his expression smug. "Human vessel," the alien said, not bothering with proper military protocol. "Our sensors detect your weapons are powered down. Wise choice. We wouldn't want any accidents with your primitive projectiles." Reed kept his voice professional. "Highborn vessel, you are in human space. Please return to your territory immediately." The highborn commander laughed. "Or what? You'll throw rocks at us." Before Reed could respond, his tactical officer spoke up. "Sir, they're launching fighter drones. 3 of them, heading toward the mining colony." Reed straightened in his chair. This was new. Until now, the Highborn had stuck to simple border violations. Launch our defensive drones. Warning shots only. The space between the ships lit up as human drones fired short bursts from their point defense guns. The shots weren't meant to hit, just to show they could. The Highborn fighters scattered, clearly not expecting such a quick response. Their commander's face showed the first hint of uncertainty. "Return to your space immediately," Reed repeated, "or we will be forced to take defensive action." The Highborn commander's scales darkened with anger. "You dare threaten me? Our ships could vaporize your entire colony. Your projectile weapons are nothing but—" His words cut off as one of his fighter drones exploded. Everyone on both bridges watched in shock. The Highborn commander's eyes widened. "Sir," Reed's tactical officer reported, "the drone was hit by debris from our warning shots. Looks like their shields weren't rated for kinetic impacts." The Highborn commander's face had lost its smugness. His fighter drones quickly retreated back to his ships. Later that day, in the Galactic Council chamber, Ambassador Walker stood calmly as High Commander Voss raged about the incident. "They fired upon our ships," Voss shouted. "This is an act of war." "Your ships entered our space with weapons powered," Walker replied evenly. "Your fighters approached our colony. We fired warning shots, as is our right under council law. The destruction of your drone was an accident, one that could have been avoided if your shields had been properly designed." Counselor Mira spoke up. "The footage shows the human ships acted within their rights. Perhaps if the Highborn spent more time upgrading their defenses and less time provoking border incidents." Voss's scales were almost black with fury. "Our defenses are the most advanced in the galaxy. We don't need to change anything to deal with primitive kinetic weapons." Walker shared a knowing look with Counselor Mira. They both recognized the dangerous mix of pride and ignorance in Voss's words. Back on the HMS Defender, Captain Reed was writing his report when a message from Earth Command arrived. It was short but concerning. "Multiple Highborn battle groups detected moving toward human space. Prepare for possible hostile action. Authorization granted for full defensive measures." Reed closed his eyes for a moment. The Highborn were about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating primitive weapons. He opened a channel to his crew. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. The mining colony on Europa II was quiet when the Highborn fleet arrived. 20 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their energy weapons already charging. High Commander Voss himself led the fleet from his flagship, the Eternal Glory. "Send the message," Voss ordered, his scales gleaming with anticipation. "Let's show these humans what real power looks like." The message was broadcast across all frequencies. "This is a disciplinary action. Surrender your colony or be destroyed. You have 10 minutes to comply." In the colony's Defense Command Center, the human defenders watched the Highborn fleet's approach. Colonel Maria Stone didn't bother responding to the ultimatum. Instead, she activated the colony's defense grid and sent a short message to Earth Command. "They're here." Voss waited exactly 10 minutes. When no surrender came, he gave the order. "Open fire. Show them the might of our superior technology." The space around Europa II lit up as 20 Highborn ships fired their energy weapons simultaneously. The massive barrage of plasma and laser fire streaked toward the colony and splashed harmlessly against the rocky surface of the moon. "What?" Voss stood from his command chair. "Where are their shields?" That's when his sensor officer shouted in panic. Multiple launches detected. Hundreds of small objects rising from the moon's surface. The humans had hidden their weapons in the moon's natural craters and crevices. Now mass drivers and rail guns emerged from their concealment, already firing. Streams of tungsten rods and depleted uranium shells filled space, moving at terrifying speeds. "Raise shields," Voss ordered, but it was too late for many of his ships. The first volley tore through 3 Highborn vessels, like they were made of paper. Their energy shields, designed to deflect plasma and laser fire, did almost nothing against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The ships broke apart, their crews never even having a chance to react. Impossible. Voss watched in horror as his fleet started taking heavy damage. Return fire. Destroy those weapon emplacements. But the human weapons were buried deep in the moon's crust. The Highborn's energy weapons left only surface scars, while more and more kinetic rounds poured from the launchers. On her tactical display, Colonel Stone watched the battle unfold exactly as planned. "Launch the interceptors," she ordered. Small, unmanned craft rose from the colony's hangars. Instead of energy weapons, each carried a simple but devastating weapon, a cloud of ball bearings. As they approached the Highborn fleet, they released their payloads. The damage was catastrophic. Thousands of small metal spheres, traveling at incredible speeds, shredded the Highborn ship's external sensors, weapons, and communication arrays. Their shields might as well have been made of tissue paper. "Status report," Voss demanded, as his flagship shook from multiple impacts. 7 ships destroyed, sir. 5 more critically damaged. We've lost contact with our fighter squadrons. In the colony's command center, Colonel Stone received a new message from Earth Command. She smiled as she read it. "Launch the second wave," she ordered. The Highborn fleet's formation broke as larger projectiles began rising from the moon's far side. These were different, guided missiles carrying massive kinetic penetrators. They ignored the Highborn's electronic countermeasures and energy defenses, targeting the largest ships first. "Retreat," Voss finally ordered, his scales pale with fear. "All ships, emergency jump out." Only 8 of the original 20 ships managed to escape. The space around Europa II was filled with debris from destroyed Highborn vessels, their mighty energy weapons and advanced shields proven useless against humanity's primitive technology. In the Galactic Council chamber, the footage of the battle caused an uproar. Ambassador Walker stood calmly as the council members watched their most powerful military force be decimated by weapons they had laughed at just months before. "This was a defensive action," Walker stated firmly. "We will protect our territory. I suggest the Highborn reconsider their approach before more lives are lost." As the council chamber erupted in heated debate, Councillor Mira caught Walker's eye and nodded slightly. The message was clear. Everything had changed. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began in chaos. Dozens of species were shouting at once, their universal translators creating a jumble of overlapping voices. The footage of the Europa 2 battle played on repeat on several screens, showing the destruction of the highborn fleet from multiple angles. High Commander Voss sat in unusual silence, his scales still pale from the defeat. Next to him, other council members who had once laughed at human weapons now looked worried. Council Leader Drake, a tall being with silvery skin, raised all four of his hands for silence. We have called this emergency session to understand what happened at Europa 2. The humans have agreed to provide an explanation. He turned to the center platform. Dr. Alice Cooper, you have the floor. The human physicist walked to the center of the chamber. Unlike Ambassador Walker's diplomatic polish, she had the straightforward manner of a teacher. Her simple white lab coat stood out among the grand robes of the council members. What you witnessed at Europa 2 wasn't magic, she began, activating a holographic display. It was simple physics, the same physics your species seemed to have forgotten in your rush to develop energy weapons. The display showed a basic diagram of a highborn energy shield. Your shields are incredible at stopping energy weapons. They can absorb or deflect massive amounts of plasma, laser fire, and particle beams. But they have a fundamental weakness. The image changed to show a bullet hitting the shield. You can't stop momentum without work. That's basic physics. When a physical object moves, it has kinetic energy. To stop it, that energy has to go somewhere. Several council members leaned forward, suddenly interested in the lesson. Dr. Cooper continued, her voice clear and firm. Your energy shields try to create a force field to stop physical objects. But to stop a 1-kilogram projectile moving at even a fraction of light speed, you'd need more power than your largest ships can generate. It's not about technology. It's about basic physics. She pressed a button, and the display showed the actual footage from Europa 2. Watch what happens to the shields when our rounds hit. They try to stop the projectiles but overload almost instantly. The shields aren't failing because they're weak. They're failing because you're asking them to do the impossible. High Commander Voss finally spoke up, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. But our shields can stop asteroids and space debris. Yes, Dr. Cooper nodded. At normal space velocities. But our weapons accelerate projectiles to much higher speeds. The kinetic energy increases with the square of velocity. Double the speed, quadruple the energy needed to stop it. The display showed a new diagram. This is why we stuck with kinetic weapons. They're simple, reliable, and almost impossible to defend against without massive energy costs. We could have developed energy weapons like yours. But why? Sometimes the simple solution is the best solution. Councillor Mira spoke next. What about our ship armor? Surely our advanced materials. Mass is mass, Dr. Cooper interrupted. Your armor is excellent against energy weapons, but it still matters. Hit it hard enough, fast enough, and it breaks. No material in the universe can change that. She showed one final simulation. A 1-kilogram tungsten rod moving at 10% of light speed has the energy of a small nuclear weapon. No shield or armor you've developed can handle that kind of impact. The laws of physics won't allow it. The council chamber was completely silent now. The earlier chaos had been replaced by deep thought, and in many cases worry. We're not here to threaten anyone, Dr. Cooper concluded. We're sharing this information to prevent future mistakes. Humanity wants peace, but we also want respect, not for our technology, but for our understanding of how the universe works. As she left the platform, Ambassador Walker stepped forward. In light of this information, we propose a joint research project. We'll help you improve your defenses against kinetic weapons, and in return, we'd like to learn more about your energy technology. We believe cooperation will benefit everyone. The council members looked at each other, Then at the battle footage still playing silently on the screens, one by one, they began to nod. Even High Commander Voss gave a slight bow of his head. Sometimes, the hardest lesson to learn was that you weren't as advanced as you thought you were. High Commander Voss stood before the assembled Highborn war fleet, the largest gathering of their warships in 50 years. 300 capital ships filled the space around their home world, their energy weapons fully charged. Thousands of fighter craft swarmed between the larger vessels. The humans think they have embarrassed us. His voice boomed across all command channels. They think their simple weapons make them our equals. Today, we will show them the true meaning of overwhelming force. But in his private quarters, Voss looked at the report from his science division one more time. Their suggestions for shield modifications would take months to implement. He crushed the datapad in his clawed hand. There was no time for changes. He had to restore the Highborn's honor now. The human defense fleet waited at the edge of their territory. Captain Tom Reed, now promoted to admiral, commanded from the bridge of the HMS Invincible. Only 50 ships faced the massive Highborn armada, but Reed remained calm. All ships, execute Defense Plan Theta, he ordered. Remember your training. We've prepared for this. The human fleet broke apart, spreading into an unusual formation. Rather than clustering together, they created a wide net, each ship surrounded by clouds of automated drones and weapon platforms. "Sir," his sensor officer called out, "Highborn fleet is moving." They're all jumping in at once. Space itself seemed to tear open as hundreds of Highborn ships appeared, their weapons already firing. The void lit up with energy beams and plasma bolts. But the human ships weren't where the Highborn expected. Reed's unusual formation had predicted their arrival points perfectly. "All ships, execute Alpha Strike," Reed commanded. The human response wasn't the few dozen ships the Highborn could see. It was the thousands of kinetic kill vehicles hidden in the darkness of space. Tungsten rods, accelerated to relativistic speeds, struck the tightly packed Highborn formation. Railgun rounds from automated platforms tore through their fighter screens. Voss watched in horror as his carefully planned assault turned into chaos. "Spread out. Return fire," he ordered, but the damage was already done. Dozens of Highborn ships exploded in the first seconds. Their energy shields, even at full power, couldn't handle the massive kinetic impacts. Ships that survived the first wave found themselves being stripped of weapons and sensors by clouds of high-velocity metal pellets. "Launch the new weapon," Voss commanded. From his flagship's hangar bay, a massive energy cannon emerged, something never before seen in combat. Energy readings off the scale. Reed's science officer reported. "They're trying something new." The giant cannon fired, sending a beam of pure energy toward the human fleet that was visible from light years away. But Reed had planned for this too. "Deploy the mirrors," he ordered calmly. Automated platforms unfolded massive arrays of polished surfaces, carefully angled. The enormous energy beam hit them and reflected, splitting into dozens of smaller beams, right back at the Highborn fleet. Voss could only watch as his own super weapons energy tore through his ship's already strained shields. A third of his remaining fleet disappeared in a cascade of explosions. "Sir," his second-in-command reported, scales completely pale. "We've lost 60% of our forces. Our fighters are gone. The humans are launching another wave of kinetic strikes." In the HMS Invincible's bridge, Reed received a transmission from Earth Command. He smiled as he read it. To all ships, he broadcast on an open channel that the Highborn could hear. "Hold position. Let's give them a chance to surrender." The Highborn fleet hung in space, their formation shattered, their superior numbers reduced to scattered groups of damaged ships. Their mighty energy weapons had barely scratched the human fleet. On his flagship's bridge, Voss looked at the tactical display one last time. His entire civilization's belief in their military superiority had been broken in less than an hour. With scales dark with shame, he opened a channel to his fleet. "All ships, stand down. Send the surrender signal." The greatest space battle in recent galactic history had ended not with an energy blast, but with the simple application of mass times velocity squared. The Galactic Council chamber was unusually crowded. Representatives from every major species had come to witness this historic session. The defeat of the mighty Highborn fleet was already being called the most significant event in the last 1,000 years of galactic history. Ambassador Walker sat calmly in the human section, watching as various council members whispered among themselves. Next to him, Admiral Reed stood in his formal uniform, still showing the tiredness from the recent battle. High Commander Voss entered the chamber last. His usual grand entrance was replaced by a quiet walk to his seat. His scales, once bright with pride, had taken on a permanent grayish tinge. Behind him, several other highborn officials followed with lowered heads. Council Leader Drake called the session to order. "We are here to discuss the recent conflict and its implications for galactic society." He turned to Voss. "High Commander, you may speak first." Voss stood slowly. The entire chamber went silent, waiting for his words. "The Highborn," he paused, visibly struggling with what he had to say. "The Highborn acknowledge our defeat. I was wrong to dismiss human military capabilities. Our pride has cost us dearly." As he spoke, holographic displays showed the extent of Highborn losses. Over 200 ships destroyed, thousands of fighters lost, and tens of thousands of crew members dead or missing, all against a human fleet that had suffered minimal damage. More importantly, Voss continued, his voice growing stronger, "We were wrong about human technology itself. We mistook simplicity for weakness. We failed to understand that advancement doesn't always mean complexity." Walker noticed several council members nodding. Even species that had long feared the Highborn were paying close attention. A representative from the trading world stood up. "In light of recent events, we propose new trade agreements with Earth. We are particularly interested in their defensive technologies. The Science Coalition would also like to establish joint research projects." Another member added, "The humans' understanding of practical physics could benefit all species." More and more council members began speaking up, each wanting to establish closer ties with humanity. The same species that had laughed at primitive human weapons now sought their protection and knowledge. Admiral Reed leaned over to Walker and whispered, "Amazing how quickly they change their minds when faced with clear evidence." Walker nodded slightly. Fear and respect often look similar in politics. Council Leader Drake raised his hands for silence. "We must also address the future role of the Highborn in galactic security. For centuries, they have been our primary defensive force. Perhaps it is time for changes." Voss stood again. "The Highborn accept that we can no longer claim military superiority. We propose a joint defense initiative, working alongside human forces. We have much to learn from each other." Walker finally rose to speak. "Humanity accepts the Highborn's proposal. We did not seek this conflict, nor do we seek to replace you as the galaxy's defenders. What we want is cooperation and mutual respect." He activated his own holographic display, showing designs for new shield systems that combined Highborn energy technology with human kinetic protection principles. "Together, we can create defenses that stop both energy and kinetic weapons. Together, we can build a safer galaxy. All we ask is that you remember this lesson. Never dismiss an idea simply because it seems simple or primitive." The council chamber erupted in approving sounds from various species. Even some of the Highborn were nodding, their natural pride giving way to practical wisdom. Councillor Mira caught Walker's eye from across the chamber. "Humanity has changed everything," she said softly, though her words carried in the quiet chamber. "The galaxy will never be the same." Walker smiled. Change was inevitable. The only question was whether it would come through wisdom or force. Today, finally, wisdom has won. As the council began discussing the details of the new galactic order, Walker thought about how far they'd come. From being laughed at to being sought after, all because humans had remembered what the others had forgotten. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the best ones. 1 year after the Great Battle, the Galactic Council headquarters looked very different. The once rigid seating arrangement had been replaced by a circular design where all species sat as equals. At the newly installed human section, Ambassador Walker prepared to give his final address before retiring. The chamber was packed. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy had come to hear the man who had helped reshape their civilization. Even the news networks from distant worlds were broadcasting the session. High Commander Voss, now wearing the simpler uniform of the Joint Defense Force, sat with his human counterpart, Admiral Reed. The two had become unlikely friends over the past year, working together to create a new military doctrine that combined the best of both their cultures. Walker stood and walked to the center of the chamber. The lights dimmed slightly, focusing attention on him. He pulled out an old projectile rifle from behind the podium, the same one he had shown the council in his first presentation. 1 year ago, many of you laughed at this weapon, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Today, I bring it back not to remind you of past mistakes, but to teach one final lesson. He held up the rifle. This weapon is not remarkable because it's powerful. It's remarkable because it's honest. It doesn't pretend to be more than it is. It follows the basic laws of physics that govern our universe, laws that no amount of advanced technology can overcome. A holographic display is activated, showing scenes from the past year. Highborn and human engineers working together on new defense systems, joint military exercises, scientific conferences where multiple species shared knowledge freely. Look how far we've come, Walker continued. The Highborn fleet now uses hybrid shields that can stop both energy and kinetic weapons. Our ships carry weapons designed by 5 different species. We've learned to combine our knowledge instead of dismissing what we don't understand. He gestured to various council members. The trading worlds have discovered that simple solutions often work better than complex ones. The Science Coalition has found new research directions by revisiting basic principles. Even the exploration fleet has improved their ships by remembering old lessons about momentum and mass. Walker placed the rifle on a display stand. This weapon will stay here, in the council chamber, as a reminder, not of humanity's victory, but of a simple truth. Progress isn't always about making things more complicated. Sometimes it's about remembering what we already know. Councillor Mira stood up. Ambassador Walker, before you retire, the council has an announcement. We have unanimously voted to create a new position, Chief of Scientific Understanding. Its role will be to ensure we never again dismiss knowledge simply because it seems primitive or basic. Walker smiled. And who will fill this position? Dr. Alice Cooper has agreed to take the role, Mira replied, as the human physicist stood up from her seat. Her first project will be creating an educational program that teaches advanced species to respect fundamental principles. The chamber filled with approving murmurs. Walker looked around at the gathered representatives. Former enemies now allies, old rivals now partners. Even the highborn scales had regained some of their shine, though with less arrogance and more wisdom. My final request to this council is simple, Walker said. Remember that every species, no matter how advanced or primitive they might seem, has something to teach us. The moment we stop learning is the moment we stop growing. He turned to Admiral Reed. A year ago, humans were newcomers, laughed at for our simple weapons. Today, we're respected not for our technology, but for our understanding. That's the real victory, not that we won a battle, but that we helped create peace. As Walker stepped down from the podium, the entire chamber rose in a standing ovation. The sound of dozens of species showing respect in their own ways filled the air. Clicking mandibles, humming crystalline bodies, rippling color displays, and good old-fashioned human clapping. In the back of the chamber, a young highborn cadet turned to his human counterpart. Did they really laugh at human weapons? The human cadet smiled. They did, but more importantly, they learned not to. And above them all, through the crystal ceiling, the stars shone down on a galaxy forever changed by the simple lesson that sometimes the oldest solutions were still the best ones.